can't ever really remember a tornado ever really in the Dallas area proper. And um, I think there was one a couple of years ago, and then now again. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw the records, me and my son were looking, they haven't had a tornado here since like the black and white era of television, where there was like a tornado was unheard of back then. There was like, it's all the rage. And there was like probably in the newspapers for a full week, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah,
people come forward from their farms, finally found after the hurricane, they buried themselves or something, not
yeah,
sure.
yeah. Playing with themselves.
Yeah, or something was going on. But okay, so we are doing, besides talking about tornadoes, this is GVDS Presents. This is session number 13. This is session, for those who are not aware, is basically to highlight and showcase a lot of practitioners and professionals that have been part of the Global Virtual Design Sprint, or are very active in the design thinking, innovation, design sprint space. And I do this just because there are so many interesting people that I run into that I don't fall back on whether or not you've sold a lot of books, or you have a lot of money, or you have a lot of notoriety. I think there's real value in just kind of, you know, talking with other people that normally just live their lives, but are just really, really gifted and talented and experienced. And this is one of those individuals. His name is Andy Davis. He is the Director of UX and Innovation at Inspirus. And funny enough, Andy, I didn't know what your company did until I looked into it by kind of crafting out this session. But it's really, your company is actually really interesting. I want to kind of get into that a little bit later, but let's start with you. So you in the last Global Virtual Design Sprint in April, you were someone that I heard that was like second to Sandy Lamb. You were someone that your entire team was like over the hill with how you kind of held yourself, with how you collaborated with people. I mean, you were seen as an extremely valuable team member. And it shows, because according from what I understand of you, you've been doing this more or less for about 20 years. You've been involved in creation and delivery of digital and physical products, you know, within the awards and recognition industry. Over the course of your career, you've served a variety of leadership roles in a lot of things, in information technology, design, product management. Now you're in user experience and innovation. So after saying all that, I don't know where to start with you. I will say that we are both transmitting from different places. So I am in outer space, which is actually appropriate, because I feel like, as much as I've been doing, I feel like I'm in outer space. But you are the intrepid reporter down the ground in like a very, would you say you're in Colorado? You're in the Rocky Mountains? I mean, where would you call yourself right now?
Yeah, this is actually in northern New Mexico, in the foot of the Colorado Rockies.
Very nice. So now that we've established our locations, beyond what I've already said in the introduction, why don't you give kind of a brief overview of who you are, what you do, what kind of things you do in Inspirus, and what the company's all about?
Yeah. So, gee, I mean, thanks for all the kudos and your description. You know, I'm a pretty simple guy, right? At the core, I love working with people. I love collaborating, and I love the thought and the thrill of what happens when people come together and produce and come up with unique ideas and solutions that are oftentimes you can't do any other way than working with people. And so I have a very deep passion, and really, as I looked back, or as I reflect back on my career to date, you know, every time that I'm happiest or most successful is when others are being successful and people are coming together and working together. And I just really enjoy that, whether that's working with internal teams or you know, customer-facing projects or partnerships. It really just doesn't matter. And I think you know, in essence, so much of what we do is all about people. But my career has spanned a lot of different things here. But one of the things that I feel like I've always brought to the table is understanding and applying design thought process to business problems, to anything that comes across my bow. And I have yet to find anything that a careful conversation and a kind of a breakdown of a problem and reassembly can't solve.
Do you find that your approach to problem solving and kind of addressing a situation or a project is kind of put you in the position that you're in, like your demeanor, your approach to things?
Yeah, I think so. I've had a few people along the way that have mentored me, some people that I've worked with over the years, and they had a natural disposition to this kind of thinking and this approach. And I quickly gravitated towards those individuals and really kind of modeled a lot of behaviors they shared early in my career, and I've just adopted those. And I can't ever think of any other way to work, right? This just feels design and the world of design, and especially design sprints, it all just feels like a natural thing, right? It doesn't feel like it's a process that you really have to think through. Obviously, there's some frameworks and methodologies that require a little bit of discipline, but at the end, it feels very natural to me, and so I'm thankful for that, and I try and share that with others.
So tell me a little bit about your work in Inspirus and what your oh, let me start over again. Let me tell you, let me tell you, but you tell me a little bit about your work at Inspirus, what you currently do, and what really intrigues you about the company you work for.
Yeah, so currently I'm leading the user experience and innovation efforts, and we're a small team. Currently, we've got just a couple people, and we expand and contract as needed, depending on projects and efforts. I'm basically leading the user experience design from concept to prototyping to all the way through the whole life cycle into delivery and everything that goes with launch. And so I'm able to get my hands dirty in all of those phases, and then bring in some key resources along the way to help us with scope and scale as needed. And then we do some innovation work inside of that. I've had the ability to conduct a few workshops, a few innovation, we call them innovation days, but they really were modeled after the Atlassian Shipit days or the FedEx days that they do. And those are, we can talk more about those a little bit later, but those are amazing events. And some of the outcomes are phenomenal beyond just the deliverables. But that's really kind of what I focus here on. Obviously, I've had some stints in technology, leading a technology team, and understanding the development process and all the ins and outs of that. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Actually, I want to jump right into that since we're on the topic, so we don't lose track of it. So tell me a little bit about those events and what kind of goes into those.
Yeah, so the Shipit Events, and we really just kind of took it verbatim, but from what Atlassian had created. But basically, there's self-organizing teams, and we initiated the event and communicated to all the teams really what it was about, which is, think of whatever you want to do, some small project, something that you can do in a 24-hour time frame, execute on, and see what kind of value you can deliver, or what kind of benefits, or what kind of learnings that you gain. And it may be just exploring a particular space around a project or a problem. And so the way that framework worked is we had 2 workshop days for the teams. Basically, we just set time aside for those teams to come together, meet, describe the problem, kind of explore the problem space, think about some of the solutioning that could come into play. We didn't have a lot of formal structure. Had I been more involved with design sprint methodology then, we probably would have adopted some of that thinking and some of those processes into that. And then basically those teams came together on what I call game day, and they had 24 hours to design, build, and execute on their problem, and then present it at the end of that 24 hours. And we had a couple teams that went the full 24 hours, so they were up late hours. And what happens inside of those events, and this is what happens in design sprints as well, but even more intensely in these kind of 24-hour events, people get very passionate about what they're doing, but they also begin to establish norms in teams. and there's an interesting efficiency and camaraderie that begins to develop. And then when you think about post-event, after it's all over, these networks and these alliances and these teams, that energy carried over for many, many months, even years after that event. People would talk about it. They naturally broke down barriers, and we increased communication. It was a lot of people that experienced and went through this process, which we had, I think we had 80 to 90% participation in the company. So it was very widely adopted. You would have people, the day or 2 or 3 after, and they were still kind of riding the high. They were just like, when can we do this again? How can we do it? And then it was embraced very well with senior leadership, to the point where at the end of the event, there was, and this, I organized the event, and this was kind of a surprise for everybody, but they handed out, checks and money to people who participated, just ad hoc. They were just like, hey guys, that was phenomenal. We're gonna, here's some money, right? And it was a token amount, but it wasn't chump change either. So
wow,
it was, it's amazing to see these things embraced, and the power of people.
So is this ongoing? Is this something that happens like every year, or twice every year? I mean, what's the frequency of it?
Yeah, so we did it the one time, and then we've had a couple follow-up small iterations of that, where the teams came together and continued working, kind of iterating on some of their deliverables or some of their ideas. One of the things that we learned out of it, and this was a big learning, which is, what do you do with these ideas afterwards? How do you really deliver on these? How do you, all of a sudden you have a corporate strategy that's been set, and now all of a sudden you have this item that comes in from left field, and how do you embrace that? How do you allocate resources? How do you deliver and reap the benefits? And so there were some learnings in that, and we definitely had to kind of feel our way through it, and a few bumps in the road, but we got 2 of the projects launched and in play, and they produced significant revenue gains for the company. So.
With the business numbers that derive from this, do the people that originally were part of the inception, like the original idea, do they get informed of how their work is kind of manifested into company success?
Yeah, and actually that was part of their pitch. So we had a panel of judges, and so the original part of their pitch was to project or measure what they think the outcomes would be over time. Then as one of the projects was delivered, it had a very clear measurable KPI around it, and that was reported on almost monthly, I think, for at least probably 24, 48 months to monitor and understand that.
Interesting. And that was something that provided the rationale for doing more of those in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always a lot of energy around anybody who thinks about or mentions the thought of doing these kind of activities within our culture. And we're a very busy culture. So in fact, I just came from, this is team building week here at our office. So I just came over from a big presentation by our CEO in the warehouse, and now we've got all sorts of activities. And unfortunately, I've been dubbed on my team to participate in the egg smashing in your face exercise. So I'll try and post a video on that.
Yeah, I'm going to have to try to translate that into a virtual space at our design sprint. So yeah. I think I'm going to build in about 20 minutes of like delay while everyone kind of cleans up, buckets up the floor and everything else.
Yeah,
you're literally talking actual eggs, correct?
Yeah, I don't know all the rules, but we've got, they've handed out this sheet of paper that has all the particulars, and evidently we've got to carry an egg around for the entire week without it cracking. All that kind of fun stuff. So it's a great culture here, and every year we have a full team building week full of exercises like that.
If I may, can I ask you to smile really fast for social media, since I'm promoting this right now?
Sorry, what was it? Say it again.
Can you
smile? Yeah.
Really fast. Yeah. All right. Hang on. 1, 2, and 3. Thank you. Okay. So tell me a little bit about the company itself. What does the company do? I got an idea from reading the information on the website, but what's your company all about?
Yeah, so we are at the core, we are trying, our mission is to bring joy to the workplace. It's actually, I think our tagline is bring joy to the workplace one experience at a time. And so those experiences unfold in a variety of different ways. Some of the more traditional experiences that most people have experienced at some point in their career is just simple years of service awards, right? You've been somewhere 5 years. It's important that your manager steps forward, congratulates you, recognizes you in a meaningful way, in a personal way. And then inside of that experience, hopefully you've got coworkers, maybe a message from your CEO, and they usually cap it off with some sort of option to choose an award or a gift. And so when it comes to that type of recognition or those kind of experiences, we are the beginning and the end of that whole experience, from notifying people to providing the entire experience in between to collecting the order and delivering a gift. And it sounds like a very simple process. It is amazing at the complexity and the nuances that are involved in really the responsibility, because we look at it and we say somebody who's celebrating 5, 10, 15, 20 years of service, they've been waiting for that gift for 20 years. We better get it there right and on time, and that experience better be top notch. They better come away from that experience thinking this company really appreciates me and my manager enjoys what I do, and that I am engaged and I'm having an impact. And then we have other forms of recognition, which are more centered around peer-to-peer. So I might recognize you, Robert, for, you did a great job in that presentation the other day. Thanks a lot. Your manager may see that recognition, go, that's worthy of some points. I'm going to throw some points on top of that. And then as you accumulate points, you can redeem them in a mall. So those two basic forms of recognition really start to form the equation of employee engagement, and how can we move that needle or help companies move that needle in a positive direction.
What's really interesting is that a lot of what you're talking about, I tried to do at my last enterprise job, because there just wasn't anything there. There were things where your manager nominated you for company-wide recognition. There were mechanics within the enterprise that kind of were kind of more engineered towards favoritism, but not actual like results or market impact or even professional development. So I spent a good portion of my 2 years there instituting things that I could within the circle of influence I had to do peer recognition, recognition awards, things that would feed into the VP, so that at team meetings, we would basically recognize these individuals for what they had done. And it was really tracking what they were involved with and what their peers thought of them. I mean, other things that I tried were goal setting and from the perspective of like just weekly check-ins, but sanctioning part of the time to really work on things that either weren't necessarily aligned with the business, but really develop them as professionals, and kind of buying into servant leadership and making that top priority. So a lot of what your company does in terms of its services, it aligns with my philosophy around putting people first and really trying to showcase that the time they spend at work, the time they spend on their projects, is something that makes a difference. And it's not necessarily just putting everything into a black hole and hoping that something comes out of it. Do you find that what Inspirus does resonates with a certain type of company, with a certain size? Have you found that it's all across the board? I mean, what have you experienced while you've been there?
Yeah, I would say it's all across the board. Our solutions are typically aimed at Fortune 1000, Fortune 500 companies, just because of the scale in which we operate, and we can enable a lot of things to happen efficiently and consistently across those enterprise-wide needs. But really, any company needs it. I mean, this is when you kind of go back to basic kind of Maslow's hierarchy kind of stuff, being validated, feeling like you are part of something. These are core things, right? And when you fill those needs and you enable employees to realize that they start performing and they start doing things that they wouldn't ordinarily do. And no, you're right. It's about people. And some people kind of will go down the route and it's like, well, I'm rewarding people, but this was their job. Um, that's true to an extent, but people want to be showcased. They want to understand that above and beyond, they mean something to someone and to the organization. And that's what these platforms do. It's about showing that they mean something and that their contribution is part of how we all grow and how we all succeed.
It's recognizing the human relationship behind the professional endeavor, so that it is about tribes. It's about people getting along, but it's also about recognizing that's part of the dynamic. That's not just you go to work, you get something done, you leave. There's a whole I would say like community around what you do. So how does Inspirus share those stories? I mean, maybe reflecting upon your role in user experience, how do you communicate that to the outside world through like the experience that people have with kind of going with, say, Inspirus versus someone else?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're really focused on is the relationship between the social nature of recognition and how that plays into everything. And so a lot of our platforms over the past couple of years have really been aimed at becoming more social. And a few years back, there were a few companies that were jumping on that bandwagon just because they saw it as a mashup. But we've taken a very strategic approach around trying to really understand the connection points and establishing those connections so that the social nature happens when it should and in the right way. And it's amazing to see, when someone, likes your recognition, again, it's that basic hierarchical need. Now I feel like I belong. Now I feel like I mean something. And so we kind of count those as recognition impressions. That's one of the measures in our industry is, how many different impressions can someone receive off of one recognition? And obviously social is a great way to amplify that.
So with your own career, with everything that you've done, what kinds of things are you looking forward to working on in the future? Like if you were to project out into 2020 and some of the things that you have lined up, is it using the existing kind of infrastructure and the programs that you set in stage and just kind of using those shells to kind of see where people go in terms of innovation or user experience or in that realm? Or have you had some ideas, like I've heard from other people, around taking something like the design sprint process and retrofitting it or modifying it to suit like a particular some sort of new endeavor or new program? Or what do you, I guess my overall question is, what do you have planned for 2020? I'm only speculating.
Yeah. Hopefully a vacation at some point.
Well, you're living the vacation every time we put a virtual background up. You never have to leave.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm really looking at is, and I'm very, I want to sharpen my skills around design sprints to the point where we can begin looking at that methodology and possibly tailoring a methodology around design sprints for HR, and specifically around recognition and designing programs and understanding all of the various complex nuances in large organizations. And I would like to begin to explore some of those frameworks and see what adjustments might need to be made to achieve some amazing results in that arena. Oftentimes our customers, this is one of the areas that they may struggle with. And I think a lot of times they probably are making decisions with some information, but probably not a lot. And there's typically not a lot of room for trial and error. They kind of just, they think that's good enough and then they roll with it. And I think there's really some great opportunities to use design sprints to really bring some iterative nature to it and get them where they need to go. Some other things that my kind of current learnings, things that I really want to explore in 2020 is our friend, Mr. Alexi, he turned me on to the jobs to be done methodologies and theories. And I'm super excited about that. and understanding how those feed into design sprints. It's JTBD is a fairly heavy process, but I think there's some nuances in there that can really be applied to either pre-research or feeding into the design sprints, and the outcome-driven innovation, is stemming from that as well. So those are all things that I'm actively pursuing and looking for ways to introduce into our environment here, and really explore those opportunities with others outside the organization. We've talked before about there's a whole world of nonprofits that can benefit from these kinds of things as well.
Yeah, and there's so much of so many places I can go with what you're talking about. I'll stick with
Sorry, I threw a lot out there.
No, because it's like, oh, I want to talk about that. Oh, I want to talk about that.
Yeah.
So I read, and I can't for the life of me remember where I saw this, where someone did something similar to kind of combining jobs to be done with design sprints. Mm-hmm. But they reframed it in terms of, instead of like looking at it from the framework of like Christensen and milkshake analogy and so on, but looking at it from the perspective of options and outcomes. So and mixing, and this is where research and ethnography is recast into design sprints as a precursor to the design sprints. So it's really, you hear a lot of outcry like, where's the research? Where are you talking to users? If you reframe JDBD in a fashion so that you're saying, okay, out of all the different options that someone has to a particular situation, what are the perceived outcomes versus the actual outcomes, and walking those through with people in, say, like airports or at home when they're ordering things, of all the different options they could basically do, and kind of categorizing that and canonizing it so it becomes part of a conversation and almost a mental model map of what people could do in relation to what you're thinking about doing in the design sprint. I have to look it up because somebody did it like at the very beginning of the year, and it was such an intriguing way of doing it, and it was low cost and less friction, where you didn't have to go through the full JDBD to do it, but you got to the essence of what you were essentially doing with potential options and where it can go.
Yeah, that sounds pretty interesting. So it's basically, it sounds like you're describing, it's helping you build out constructs.
Exactly. Like it's like there are, if you're at the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, so to speak, like if you're where you are right now, and we want to try to scale up that larger elevation behind you, there's a number of places you can go. There's probably the established trail, and you have this outcome where you don't have a lot of scratches or whatever. You could be you could decide to forego the trail and decide to try to climb your own path, and there's that result. Or you do this, and just walking through the options and then writing down what you think it's going to happen versus when you actually experience it and what actually does, and what is a repeatable, a desirable outcome based on either the person or the context of the situation. So it involves some work, but what you essentially do is you feed literally every other aspect of the design sprint process by doing this, so that you're not coming to a conclusion, you're getting systematic and actual practical evidence of some hypothesis early on about where things could go, and then you just kind of explore it from there. So that's at least my impression. The other thing, when you mentioned HR and design sprints and seeing where that goes, are you familiar with what Jerome Framau and Sabrina Gorich are doing with the talent sprint, correct?
I need to tap into that deeper. I have only kind of scratched the surface, and it's on my list, but I want to learn more about what they're doing on that. It seems like it's a very interesting space that they're moving into, and I think it's a space that the HR community could greatly benefit from.
And I'll give it to you in a nutshell, and I'll also mention Rakesh Kasturi's Life Sprint, which is somewhat similar. But the talent sprint is essentially a thesis that you can showcase what people do qualitatively, kind of give them a project with a nonprofit. Maybe it's associated with, say, a business, or it's a third party. But you have a group of people, work with them, different disciplines, and you help the nonprofit or the NGO with an initiative or with planning or with funding or some aspect they really need. They would never have access to resources, but they have them now. They go through somewhat of a design sprint process. Everything is recorded and kind of kept. And then for those that really like what they did and think it's representative of their work, they're open to having companies take a look at their body of work for that endeavor, what they've done, how they communicated and worked with other people, how they handled themselves, all of that. And that's one impression a company can have, so that if they're interested in bringing them in, it foregoes the need to emphasize a resume or emphasize a cover letter and get into the cultural fit, getting into the other nuances of what makes a good team member in terms of that particular aspect. So that's where I think that's kind of headed, but they're doing a lot of pilots right now in October to kind of, flesh that out. The life sprint is more around life and professional planning, and really kind of being a bit open about where you are, but then trusting the process to kind of guide you towards some particular avenues that you can explore on your own. But so far from what I've heard from people is that even though they're refining it, it's got a lot of promise in terms of a guide to kind of setting your own pace, writing out what kind of process you want to use to kind of fulfill your goals or your dreams. So it's really interesting to see how that design, like I mentioned before, the design sprint process is kind of morphing into other things that people use them based on context and need.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. I've got to dig in deeper on those, because I'm fascinated by how people are taking the design sprint methodology and they're tweaking it and adjusting it for all these different things. And I oftentimes kind of step back, and I don't know about you, and I love the term design sprint, and it implies a lot of methodology, but when I distill it down even further, I just think of these things as design. This is, when you design, you have to understand things before you can begin to solve them. And I love design sprints because it really brings some rigor to the process, right? But at its core, it's just creativity and design, and that's, I think, why it translates so well to all these different aspects of business or these other niche places that people are applying it. So it's really really fun to watch.
Yeah, and I remember banging the gavel on this back when the book came out, and just doing a lot of experimentation within my old company, and really just trying to say, look, people, this is something that, I mean, I just saw it written on the wall that it was gonna really influence and affect how people were gonna work and stuff. But now it's 2019 and it's kind of coming to fruition. But it's always intriguing and interesting to see how it works out. For those of you who are on Zoom and YouTube, if you'd like to post some questions up for Andy Davis, now is the time. We're going to be doing Q&A in a few minutes. We're just going to wait for a few more questions to come in. But before we get to that, Andy, I do want to talk about your intrepid career as a cyclist, which I did not know until recently. And that blew me away. I was like, really? If you could repeat what you had kind of shared in a Lightning Decision Gem that you were part of recently.
Yeah. So, I'm an avid cyclist. I grew up cycling since the age of 12, kind of just tripped into it, loved it, had a lot of success all through my career. Never was a professional by any means, but had a great opportunity to, growing up in Dallas, obviously Lance Armstrong was always around. And although we didn't know each other, we always kind of ran with similar people and trained with a lot of same people.
Oh, but he knew who you were. He just didn't want to he didn't want to take away your shine at all. It's like, look, I got to do my own thing. This guy is he's taking up all the attention. So
yeah. I let him take
him. You actually drove him to where he eventually got to.
Yeah. If it weren't for me, always in the background, shadowing him and threatening his first places, I don't know where he would be today without that. But
yeah.
So
Andy, what you're saying is you drove him to performance enhancing drugs.
Yeah. It was the only way.
You were so good that literally he says, you know what, I got to cheat just to get past Andy. That's the only way.
It was the only way. No, So later on in my career, after I exited college and started professional life, I got into track cycling, and a really good friend of mine was involved and led the EDS track or cycling team, and was involved in the velodrome up in Frisco, which I think may not be there anymore now, but it's really a fun sport. And, it's treated me well. I've had the opportunity to travel the world, been to several world championships in Manchester. And, it's a great sport. It's fun. And yeah, I've been lucky to have that in my life.
Is there a particular region or locale that you cycled in as part of your career back then that still sticks with you to this day?
Oh, I'd probably have to just say, and this isn't going to sound very sexy or very exciting, but White Rock Lake. I can't tell you, I've ridden thousands upon thousands upon thousands of miles around that lake, and so many training events there, and there's nothing, it's not mountains, it's not beach, it's not some amazing course in France for the Tour de France, but there's, at the end of the day, White Rock Lake's always been a great place, and kind of call my training home.
Interesting.
Yeah.
By the way, if I ever looked up your account on Amazon, do you have bike reviews? If I'm looking to get like some sort of like 10 speed or something, have you ever commented on this bike is wonderful, this bike is shite? I mean, have you ever like done anything like that, or is it just a conversation I need to have with you someday?
Yeah. Just pick up the phone or hit me on Skype. I will. I'm not. It's funny. When it comes to Amazon, I rarely ever write a review, and it's sad because if I do, it's usually for a negative reason, and I'm really not very proud of that. Lately, after I went through that LDJ, was it last week or the week before, where we were talking about positivity? I've actually kind of been going through a self audit of my interactions throughout the day to try and see how positive my experiences are that I create or that I receive. And I'm still in the middle of assessing that, but it's very eye-opening when you think about it.
I always go after the 3-star reviews because I find they're more nuanced.
Yeah.
There's sometimes the 5 stars are a bit more, if there's a trust factor in them. The 1 stars are clearly, it was damaged in shipping or it didn't work after 2 months.
Yeah.
You can find some themes there, but the 3 stars tend to be a little bit more like level.
Yeah.
And for me, and I also can, when I think about my own past about being critical, I have this bent where I know that if I usually, if I know I'm going to write something that's going to affect somebody either negatively or even it's constructive criticism, I sit on it for 24 hours.
Yeah.
Because if there's any emotion that's involved with it, I tend to go, you know what? I know based on historical narrative that I'm going to regret posting it, and that I can probably find better wording and center on my main argument or my main gripe in a way that is not taking liberties with someone else's situation that I know nothing about, and getting to the action more so than the person. But that's only happened with time. But that's usually when I get any kind of like real dig. I'm a conflict seeker, so right away I'm going to be like, rah, and I want to go after it because I know everything I want to say. But I've learned through time that I just have to, level set.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's smart. I think the 3 stars are probably the meat and potatoes when I'm reviewing as well. I trust those more than the highs and lows.
So one day I hope to see some sort of like ebook or some sort of thing about best places to cycle throughout the world.
Oh,
and
yeah.
basically go like, okay, they're not really ranked, but it's like if you have a feeling for this type of experience, go here, and what to do to prepare. And literally that could be like your retirement plan.
I am overdue. We've got some dear friends in South Australia and Adelaide, and that when I get some time and I get my kids off to college, that's one of the places I need to get to, and there's some great cycling down there. So that'll probably be my next big adventure at some point.
Got it. So apparently you are so entertaining that nobody wants to ask you a question. There are people that have basically said that,
they're just speechless.
Yeah, they're just like, whoa. So now I will say that Bill Alexi is actually watching. Sabrina, who we had mentioned about the talent sprint over in Stuttgart, Germany, is also tuning in. So we have some people that we're both familiar with. I think it's like the GVDS crowd is coming around to kind of talking to both of us. So
yeah, that's great.
So I guess there's a couple of things we can kind of lead into before we wrap up. The first is maybe it's around people that are going into this global virtual design sprint fresh. So we have about 100+ people. We are just starting to kind of tackle challenges and figure out where people sit with those. So the last week was all about kind of putting people on teams and temporarily and giving them a home. Now it's making some choices around what they want to do in November. I've had a number of people kind of give some advice on what to kind of prepare for and what to do. But from your perspective, of having gone through this once before, what would you say are some top level things people should keep in mind going into a virtual design sprint that you think would be helpful?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, what I would encourage everybody to do is go all in. Give it your full effort. I promise you it will benefit. You'll be excited and you'll be glad you did. Every design sprint's different and you never know what the outcome, or depending on who's facilitating it, it may be great, it may be okay. But when you go all in, that means that you are doing your part to ensure its success. And as we know, success may be that the problem, the design problem or question can't be solved, or maybe the ideation or the solution you put together wasn't good. That's okay. Those are all good outcomes. And you can't, if people are only partially way in there and aren't giving their full effort, then that will show up. So I would just dive in, be okay with uncertainty, be okay with things that may appear rough. It's okay. All these things are just fine and they're part of the process at times. And, find a place where you can contribute, but also find a place where you can stretch yourself. And that's when you begin to learn. And those would kind of be my big things that I would advise people or encourage them to do.
And if you were to think of your top 1 or 2 things that you want to take away from this, from your time spent in November, what would those be? I know I asked that in like some of the training that I've done, or put some of the training videos I put up. But what are, for you personally, what are a couple of things that you definitely want to take away from this event this year?
Yeah, first and foremost, just I want to continue sharpening my skills around design sprints, and I'm hopefully be facilitating a team this go round, and hopefully they will be patient with me if as I grow and learn and continue to sharpen my skills. So that's a big part of it, and really all the lessons learned that come from these events. I want to be able to take those, process through them, and use those learnings to help foster and develop, hopefully, a design sprint mentality in our broader organization, because we're owned by a broader company named Sodexo. And so, looking for opportunities to help spread that competency throughout the organization. Personally, I'm aiming to chronicle some of the events over the course of the week and share them out in LinkedIn or other social media outlets to help others see and learn and understand, and just kind of grow my network. So those are some of the big outcomes, and obviously, to support you in this cause. I think this is a fantastic thing. I think it helps people. It gives people a platform to try something new, and that's always a good thing.
Appreciate that. And we do have some questions now.
Great.
So Kim McCartan, and I want to, before I kind of go into the question, I want to make sure that I give her due recognition, because she's somebody that is part of the GVDS. But she, she's from Chicago, Illinois. But she has extensive background in multimedia. She's a designer, writer. She's also a design sprint facilitator. Her question for you was, she was curious as to some of the company's clients, if you can share that. And in any industries that are particularly interested in employee recognition or appreciation, and any trends with those.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't share any customer names, but we do business with some pretty large players in the energy sector and medical. We do work with companies in travel, airline, things of those natures. So we have a very diverse portfolio of customers. What was the back half of that question?
Oh, I cleared it. Hang on.
Uh-oh.
I had it in there that it was. Hang on a second. The back half was any industries that are particularly interested in employee recognition and appreciation, and any trends you see.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a trend in the medical field, specifically hospitals and organizations that are delivering services. That's a workforce that can oftentimes go unthanked. Obviously, a lot of those people, whether they're on the front line of delivery or they're in the logistics side, there's so much that goes into that. And, you know, it's really interesting to see how people are impacted. Those workforces are impacted by recognition. And in some cases, a little bit goes a very long way. And in some cases, you know, it's just an area that people often don't think about in terms of the job they do. And we're all thankful for them when they're saving our life or helping us get better. But you know, that's such a short window of time, and you know what happens afterwards. They often don't get to see the success or the fruits of their labor.
Well, would it be interesting? Really interesting is to take something we had spoken before about jobs to be done, and framing that in terms of recognition. Like if you, what would you really appreciate, and then kind of put that in a list of other things to give them options. Say, okay, here's what you told us, but now we're going to put a few things in there and give us your reaction in terms of how that would play out, and really see how that kind of works. But yeah, I can understand why that particular industry would really want that.
Yeah.
I have a side question. This is coming from me. Since I'm assuming that in the past you've hired for people in different positions, and I've done the same as well. Since you're in the field of UX and innovation, if you were to bring in someone, what do you tend to look for in hires? Is it something where it's a combination of what the company wants and what you're looking for? And I ask this question just because I know of a lot of people that are looking in the UX field, and really they concentrate on portfolios, they concentrate on their CV and all that. But what do you tend to look for in terms of people that, if there was a position open and Inspirus, what do you tend to look for in terms of like the candidate?
Yeah, it can depend on kind of the nature or the projects that we're working on and what we're kind of aiming for. But if there's, well, and really this probably would go across the board for anything. And probably number one is culture fit.
Yeah.
Because you can't really train, you can't really teach culture. People can kind of manage themselves differently, but if they're not a culture fit, then everything else is going to be slightly discounted, no matter what their skill set is or how well they communicate. If they're not a culture fit, it gets tough. And obviously trying to find out if they're a culture fit is also very challenging as well. There's been, go ahead.
No, I was going to say real fast. I didn't mean to interrupt, but
Yeah.
How do you find character plays into that cultural fit equation?
Oh, wow. Character is very important, right? We don't do any specific testing, or I haven't done any specific testing around, you know, there's different methodologies where you can throw a test at somebody and try and measure character and things like that. You know, so often it's just spending time with them, you know, and if you can work with them a little bit, that's key. I think you can really begin to understand what they're about, how they communicate. Someone doesn't have to be a great communicator for me. If they have a passion and a spirit and an authenticity to what they're doing and how they do it, that to me transcends the ability to be the best communicator or salesperson of design. That's just my personal opinion. There's always exceptions, but I really go after the authenticity and the realness of the person, and you can develop just about anything else.
Yeah, and that was one of the dimensions of the talent sprint, and that you start to see what the person's like and how they get along with other people. So yeah, it's interesting you say that. It's almost the impression of the person that you have on there, but I mean, if I can submit something as well, I try to figure out if this person obviously is looking for opportunity, but I want to make sure it's the right fit for them. So exactly what you're saying, culture fit. I would never want to bring in someone and have their life be miserable because they're either not doing what they want to do, or the business, the role and the person are not aligned. Even if the person has hardly any experience but has like just tons of potential, needs some hand holding, and I'm willing to make the investment, then that's one of those things that makes so much of a difference to a lot of different people, especially new graduates, people that don't have the experience of working within a corporation or even a small business. So yeah.
And that's compounded. One of the things we're seeing, and another great passion of mine, is understanding and how culture works across remote workforces.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge one, and it's a little bit different, and getting to know people's different virtually. And I think that's going to be the next big thing. Obviously, global virtual design sprints, there's a reason why there's a virtual component to it and why it's so unique. And I think this is, well, we've all seen the data, but it's trending upwards, and it's hockey sticking, and it's exciting times, but you have to be mindful that you don't lose your culture in the process.
So here's an interesting parallel that just happened recently. I mean, just literally. So within the GVDS, there's been groups of people that have gotten to get to know one another just by the sake of the event, and kind of either working on a virtual sprint together, or just basically, communicating. It was almost surreal when I saw it, but I saw, so it was Lee Duncan who kind of got engineered this. Sandy Lamb, Lee Duncan, Rakesh, were all at AJ and Smart, along with Dana and John Vuitton. Like, I just saw these pictures coming through, and I thought, holy crap. And it's one of those things where it eventually was where they all met each other online, but eventually they were going to meet each other in person. It was just only a matter of time. So it's one of those things where I went to the workshop in Paris this year, and other kind of events where it's just like, eventually it's going to get there. Maybe in a workplace, there's more of a need for it, where you can work virtually for a while, but eventually you're going to come together and meet one way or another. So maybe that becomes more of the cultural norm, is that you do a lot of the work online, you work within the construct of the company, but then the idea is that everyone remote comes together one time or two times a year, and just kind of hangs out and gets to know one another. And I've seen that repeated in the past too. So
yeah. There's another group out there, if you haven't seen them, I believe it's remotehow.com.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing some really, really neat stuff, and I love they're offering remote working certifications. They're really, really driving it, and it's fun to watch them and the energy they have.
You get the same feeling I do when you see something like that, and the marketing they do, the articles that they have, the kinds of things that they're kind of like gathering it all in one space. You just know there's something there.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, yeah, if I was in that space, I'd love to do the same thing, but it's like, I'm glad they're kind of pushing the needle and pushing it forward, because they're positioned correctly. They got history on their side. The technology is moving in that direction. So it's going to be like, yeah.
They're at the leading edge of it. I'm so thankful people are doing that.
Me too. So Andy, we are at time. I want to thank you so much for joining me today on the program. Before we go, I want to make sure that we give everyone who's listening on YouTube, or watching on YouTube, I say listening because I think it's a podcast again, watching on YouTube or in Zoom, where to find you. You are on LinkedIn. You can find a lot of the material you do on Inspirus. That's an inspirus.com. You are also on Twitter at DavisA777. Is there anything else out there that you want people to know about?
No, I think, I post when I can, and I contribute when I can to the community and socially. And, if you're watching and you haven't signed up for GVDS, get hold of Robert. And if it's too late for this go round, I'm sure there'll be future opportunities coming in the spring. I'm hopeful.
So you queued me up for what I was going to do anyway. So matter of fact, Andy, there's just so happens to be something called a referral link. And I was writing an article for it this morning. So
yeah.
In a nutshell, if you are part of the Global Virtual Design Sprint now, like if you are a participant and you know of someone that you want to bring into your particular challenge or your group, there's going to be a referral link available to any of the participants that they want to. And the idea is that if you bring someone in, I can help kind of get them situated with the team and where they are. But that's a way of bypassing the late registration, and you can still join the team all the way up until November 1st. So that article and that story and that link is coming out either today or tomorrow. But the idea is that once teams know that they're doing a particular challenge and they're kind of set, maybe they could use an additional designer, or maybe they can bring in a subject matter expert that be with them the entire time. That's the avenue to do it, so that once they're solidified and where they can go, they can bring in additional people if they need to, at the original cost of kind of getting involved with the event. So it's giving people an outlet to kind of do that, rather than thinking, oh man, we don't have a developer and we really need a developer. Well, then there you go. That's my thought. So
excellent. We'll
see how that plans out. And hey, if nothing else, people can still get involved late if they need to. But beyond the GVDS stuff, Andy, I do want to thank you for coming on. I hope you have a good week down there. I hope the scenery actually becomes real for you at some point, so that vacation does become realized.
Yes.
I'll stay in outer space because obviously I need to stay up there to get an idea of everything that's going on the ground. And thanks again. Really do appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Doing the group wave. Bye, everybody. Bye, YouTube. Bye, Zoom. See you all later. Bye.
Bye.